No mai, haere mai. Welcome to the Maxim Institute podcast. My name is Jason, and I'm the Communications Manager at Maxim Institute. This is our weekly short-form podcast. These podcasts are released in tandem with our weekly column and are a chance for you to hear in depth from the column's author about some of the thinking that went into producing their final piece.
Jason, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Marcus. Always good to be here.
Always good to have you. So today we're talking about an incident, or we're starting off at least with an incident that you noted in your column arising from the protests or the gatherings in support of Palestine. And you talk about a chant that went up that was joined in by Chlöe Swarbrick. Do you want to tell us a bit more about that?
Yes, so lots of news articles like, how can 6 words be so offensive, but they can be. And she used this chant from the river to the sea, and then the crowd shouts back, Palestine will be free. And the thing that she got kind of raked over the coals for, maybe she didn't realize, well, she claimed she didn't know what it meant and what it was all about, is that it's in the charter for Hamas, the terrorist organization, where they use those words to say from the river Jordan to the Mediterranean Sea, there will be a Palestinian nation. And the unfortunate thing about that is that between the River Jordan and the Mediterranean Sea happens to be the nation of Israel. And so she got called out on that and said that that's offensive and you can't say that. David Seymour said she needs to apologize because she shouldn't have said that. And, to her credit, eventually she did, reluctantly. Yeah.
So you had two responses there. She can't say that and she shouldn't say that.
Yeah, that's right.
Is there a difference?
There is, very much so, yeah. I think you can't say that is like, it's against the law to say this. You're not allowed to say that. You shouldn't say that's probably not what you should say in polite society because you're going to offend someone. And if you don't want to offend someone, then you shouldn't say it. If you want to offend someone, go ahead and say it. But given the people who she's talking to and the people, kind of the whole situation in Gaza probably wasn't the best thing to say. So she shouldn't have said it.
And I suppose politically, she's an MP. She presumably represents in her electorate Jewish people,
yes,
as well
as a diversity of opinion and thought.
So she was raked over the coals, as you say, and eventually she apologised. Is that a breach of her right to free speech?
I don't think so. Apologising for something you said is not saying I should never have said this or you're forcing me to take it back or anything like that. I think actually what it was a discussion, which is very important, right? Which is what free speech should do, right? She said something, people didn't like it. They told her they didn't like it. She listened to them and she apologized. She could have doubled down and said, no, whatever, I believe X, Y, Z, and I stand by what I said. I'm not going to take it back. And it would have been the same thing. I think she was very wise to take it back and say, look, I apologize. I didn't mean to offend anyone. So I think...
But you wouldn't agree that she should have been taken to court over it, for example?
Well, now we get a little bit technical, I guess, because in the Human Rights Act it says that you can't bring into contempt any group of people based on a whole bunch of criteria, and one of them is country of origin. And so if you're calling for someone's country to be wiped out, which she was, albeit she claims she didn't understand implicitly, then she could maybe be taken to court because she would have brought a whole nation of people into contempt based on their country of origin.
Right. Yeah. So it's not just their race.
No, it's not race or ethnicity, which she also could have done because that implies getting rid of a whole bunch of people based on their ethnic kind of makeup as well. But it is the country of origin, yeah. Yeah,
that's interesting. I didn't realize it was quite so broad-reaching.
Well, I think every time we knock the Aussies for playing rugby against us, like, oh, what is that? Can I be taken to court for that?
No jury would ever convict you, Jason.
Right.
Okay, so why is it, if we have this distinction between a legally allowable or legally constrain speech and whether or not you should say it as a moral judgment or a prudential judgment in polite society. Why is it? Do you think it's better to have the law be as non-intrusive as possible in this area?
Yeah. I do. Because I think when people in power have the ability to tell you what you can and can't say, that's very dangerous. They can then suppress the minority. I mean, the history of free speech is the history of minorities being able to speak up and get justice. In my column, I mentioned Jacob Mchangama, the free speech advocate, who's used the example of the Southern slave rights campaigners, people who campaigned for the freeing of the slaves, and they were censored and threatened. But free speech allowed, the free speech laws, the First Amendment, allowed them to speak and to be heard. And imagine if they'd been censored, what kind of world we'd be living in today, right?
How do you change injustice from the top? It's by arguing against it.
Yeah, and if you're compelled not to, how do you? You can't.
Violence.
Exactly. And that's not what we want, right? We don't want violence in a democratic society. We want discussion and debate and disagreement and coming to resolution.
And one of the key points about free speech is we often talk about my right to say something, but there's also an audience involved, right?
That's right. Yeah. So my right to hear what you have to say, or to hear this idea that may be different from what I have been taught all my life, some other alternate theory about the way that life could be, what the good life looks like, what being a good citizen looks like, how the law should be, how we should govern ourselves. And so I think that you take away not only my right, like you say, not my right to speak, but our right to debate and to discuss and to work out as a society, which I think is the point of free speech, is that a society can work out its norms and its values and live those out together rather than having it enforced on them by someone.
Yeah. Wow. So six words, but an awful lot to unpack there, that's Jason. Right. Yeah. Thank you very much for your column, mate, and thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. You've probably heard that Chlöe Swarbrick chanted, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," at a pro-Palestine protest. Criticism was swift. David Seymour demanded she apologise. A Jewish woman told NewsHub the chant made her feel unsafe. The phrase is from the 60s, but it echoes a line in the Hamas constitution from 2017, implying the destruction of the Jewish people. Others, however, insist that this interpretation of the phrase is Islamophobic. Interestingly, at the same event, Te Atatu MP Phil Twyford was shouted down for condemning the Hamas terrorist attack of the 7th of October. Around the same time, a British Labour MP was stood down for using the phrase in the UK. These contested views and phrases raise the issue of the limits of free speech. There are legal limits to free speech in our country. Speech that directly incites violence isn't legally protected, nor is defamation or fraud. The New Zealand police define a hate crime as an act perceived to be motivated by hate. Follow-up questions might include, as perceived by whom? How much? To what end? This is regardless of the context or manner of the speech being delivered. The danger is confusing physical harm with disagreement, offence, and discomfort. Some argue that offensive, hateful speech leads to actual harm. Consider the warnings given by Labour's Willie Jackson about the possibility of a referendum on the Treaty of Waitangi. Jackson has warned that Māori would go to war over the issue and that the unrest would be 5 times worse than the unrest of the 1981 Springbok tour. Jackson noted he didn't support this. Be very clear, I don't want any disruption or violence. I'm not advocating for that at all. However, giving anyone the legal power to define offensive speech and restrain it is risky. The definition of offensive can shift over time. There is a danger that it can be used to silence minority opinions rather than protect them. Indeed, free speech advocate Jacob Mchangama has noted that those protected by unfettered speech are often minorities. Yesterday's radical might be today's establishment. Proponents of free speech believe the best way to counter harmful speech isn't censorship. As US Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis famously said, "If there be time to expose through discussion the falsehood and fallacies, to avert the evil by the process of education, the remedy to be applied is more speech, not enforced silence." They say sunlight is the best disinfectant. Free speech must be championed as an essential liberty. After refusing to back down, Chlöe Swarbrick apologised somewhat reservedly. Such was the sunlight of the debate. Certain ironies were highlighted, some questions were asked, and words were treated as though they had consequences. The ability to discuss complex issues openly and respectfully is a hallmark of a democratic society. Words do have consequences, but violence should never be one of them. Thanks for listening to the Maxim Institute podcast. If you'd like to hear more from us and keep up with the rest of our research and analysis of politics and policy in New Zealand, you can sign up on the homepage of our website to get our monthly forum email and invitations to future Maxim Institute events. You can search and subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you get your podcasts. From the team at Maxim, mā te wā, goodbye for now.